Tempest Rising is a polished, smooth-running, and great-playing real-time strategy game powered by Unreal Engine 5. That is a sentence I didn't really ever expect to say, but a whole host of contributing elements here make the game fun to play and, thankfully, technically sound. This is not a typical multi-platform game that I would review for DF, but a PC exclusive in a genre that defined that platform's earliest days. Slipgate Ironworks and 3D Realms here have crafted a new entry into that aged genre that lives up to the legacy of its finest works, in my opinion, and I think a big reason for that is due to the incredible single-player focus here. While you can of course play the game in skirmish against the CPU or in multiplayer, what sets Tempest Rising apart from my perspective from many other modern entries into the RTS genre is its campaign, with 22 intricately designed missions in total. Like some of the best RTS games of yore, you have a choice of factions: the Global Defense Forces, a high-tech and synergistic force that has its aesthetics rooted in firmly NATO-adjacent territory. Then there's the Tempest Dynasty, which is East and Global South, with heavy weapons, platforms, and flamethrowers. This dichotomy might sound familiar, and that is purposeful. The developers of this game openly flaunt their core inspiration from Command & Conquer, and the storyline is not too far off from the beats found in the second and first title in that series. There has been a devastating nuclear war which led to the spread of veiny, organic, and titular tempest across the globe, a sci-fi life form whose byproduct substance conveniently can act as fuel or weapons. Of course, the two factions are vying for the future of the species by fighting over the remaining land and resources. The game's interstitial story moments between gameplay also feel like something straight out of the CNC universe, albeit with modern technology driving it. Instead of acted out FMVs, they are now rendered in real time primarily with digital actors representing ranking leaders or second in commands that brief you on your missions and optionally give you more information and context about the world and your objective. From here, then, you see a mission screen laid out in front of you with an animated geographical map upon which you deploy for a mission. There, you're treated to a short FMV sequence where new unit types are shown off and the combat scenario ahead is prepped. Each mission is quite different from the last, and the variety is only enhanced by the different factions where the story and playstyle will vastly differ. Even the entire aesthetic to those intermission sequences are different, with GDF's cold blue holograms being replaced by Tempest Dynasty Cold War era technology, to the point of even having charming DOS prompt low-res aesthetics. It's simply wonderful. The units and backstory and gameplays are of course all new here for Tempest Rising, but the cadence and presentation of the story will be incredibly familiar if you've played Command & Conquer. For someone like me, this is not an issue at all, as Command & Conquer has not had a decent new entry in decades, and meaty single-player campaigns with this much story and production value are quite uncommon in real-time strategy, especially those that are not based on historical settings. While the cinematic influence and storytelling style come from Command & Conquer, other areas of the game have more diverse inspirations. Yes, the gameplay has a lot of Command & Conquer in it, but aspects like tech research, unit abilities, and the presence of a population cap have their roots in games from Blizzard, while mission rewards and attributed bonuses allocated to your units outside of combat are something you might find in a game from Relic or Creative Assembly. The influences run deep, and like the best games in the genre, the moment-to-moment gameplay will require your full concentration, even on the normal difficulty, I would say. You have a lot to account for, making sure your resources are accruing, expanding your base, all while making sure your units are spaced correctly and your abilities are being used. I was extremely rusty when starting the game, and as it started to get more hectic, I was quickly overwhelmed by the amount of things you can and should possibly do. But after some floundering on my part, I found a rhythm and a method and started to be more successful in controlling my forces. Still, I should stress that the game can be difficult. The campaign does start more simply with less units to control, but each campaign gets progressively more demanding the more you play into it. It does onboard you, of course, and prep you for what's to come, but that does not mean you will be good at this game right away, and you should probably expect that. It is challenging and will require a greater level of mastery, and I'm sure genre veterans will appreciate that. From the DF tech perspective, there's a good deal to talk about here. The game is shipping on Unreal Engine 5.4.3 according to its EXE, and interestingly, gives you the option to switch between DX12 and 11 when the game starts. I chose DX12, and as the game starts the first time, it does somewhat awkwardly compile shaders in the background during the initial intro videos. This makes them present unevenly while this is occurring, but the core shader pre-compilation is extremely effective in this title. I did not see one instance of shader compilation hitching or stuttering during my dozen hours of play. The game is very smooth and very fast. Just loading into the game, for example, from the main menu took around 2 seconds on a Ryzen 7 9800X 3D with a Gen 4 NVMe drive. Reloading a save mid-game is also much the same. So if you fail in an attack and want to save scum to victory, this game's core loading is efficient enough to make that a friction-free affair. In terms of graphics, I would say this game is much more modest than it could have been, but that has a great effect on speed and performance, which I'll get into later. Based upon visual examination, the game does not take advantage of headline Unreal Engine 5 features like Lumen, Nanite, or virtual shadow maps, in spite of the engine version. For aspects like Nanite or Lumen, I honestly think it isn't actually missed, as you'd be hard-pressed to find areas where that would greatly help the game's visual presentation, as much of the game is played out from a far-out top-down perspective where nuances of lighting and geometric quality are not the primary concern or even the core driving force behind the game's aesthetic at that point. The game does use standard level of detail, which subtly swaps based on camera distance. This does not hurt the game's visual though in any great way. The only standard UE5 feature that I think would have aided this game's visuals would be virtual shadow maps, as the standard shadow map quality here is just average. It is not as precise as it potentially could have been if VSMs were enabled. In terms of presentation of the stuff that looks great, you have those talking head moments where even without stuff like Lumen and Nanite, the characters look really great and they animate in a fun way. Then you have the units, which at maximum zoom factor do not tend to break down too much, and they look distinctive, importantly when masked up for attack. So you can easily pick them out in the melee, which is pretty important in a game like this. One of my favorite aspects of the units in the game are the usage of headlights on the various vehicles, which light up surrounding terrain and objects as they bounce around the environment. Explosions and particle effects are also another high point in this game's visuals, where oil barrels, fuel depots, and the game's various structures detonate wonderfully with big Quake 2-like fireballs that have lots of sparks. It is a key thing that this game has satisfying effects work, and here the developers clearly spared no effort in making sure all the bangs and booms looked great. Backing up the explosive action is a solid soundtrack with diverse types of tracks and a number of composers, and it is driven by the context in the mission. At times you can have heavy guitar-driven tracks that emphasize the havoc in front of you. Or you can be on a sneaking mission with a specialist and have an ambient track. Basically, there's music of a variety of intensities and moods for almost any occasion in the game, and even a few tracks here from Frank Lepacki that are as intense as you might imagine. So a lot is done well on the presentation side, but I would be remiss if I did not mention a few nitpicks. One is how textures load. Occasionally, you can find a texture loading when you click around the map. This doesn't happen too often though. The second downside I would say is more visible, and it's common in all the footage you should see here. A large number of the game animations seem to tick at half of your output frame rate. Just watch this infantry unit run across the ground here at 60 FPS and 60 Hz. The unit positions in the 3D world update per frame, but the animations of the run cycle are half rate. The intensity of the animation makes this more or less obvious. Helicopter blades, for example, look especially framey at 60 FPS due to this decimated animation rate. there are some other aspects to the visuals like particle effects or flipbook animations, which appear to be half rate as well. So a good number of the animations are done this way, but a great deal are not. Some building animations like this turret here have a half refresh rate animation when they pop out after completing construction, but other buildings like the barracks animate at full rate. So half rate animation is not universally applied here. A positive aspect of this half rate animation is the higher a frame rate is, the less obvious its inconsistencies will be. When I played the game at 120 FPS, I had a much harder time seeing the issues from half refresh rate animations because half rate now was 60 FPS, which looks a lot smoother. Either way, I'm not sure if this is an intentional optimization given how inconsistently it is applied. And if it is intentional, I would prefer to have an option in the menu which would force full rate animations for anything at all in the game, no matter what. Now getting over to performance, I did mention how I played a lot of this game at 120 FPS and I thought it was a fantastic experience. Based upon a gameplay recording I've made here for this video of 30 minutes of gameplay that varies from light to intense, I saw 0 dropped frames while playing the game at 4K native 120 Hz on an RTX 5090 with a Ryzen 7 9800X3D. The GPU barely ever crested 70% GPU utilization here, and the CPU was not exactly being challenged. Some of this incredible performance does come down to the fact that the game is not taking advantage of UE5's highest end features, of course, but also it is not guaranteed that a game running on Unreal Engine is going to be performant on the CPU with smooth frame times like this, even on a high-end CPU. Either way, I would say based upon the gameplay type here, they made the right decisions on those high-end features for the most part, and the game on high-end hardware does truly fly, and it is incredibly smooth with no frame time issues to worry about. On lower-end hardware, there are more performance realities to take into consideration here, but it is good on the GPU side. An RTX 3060, a rather low-end GPU at this point, could easily manage 90 to 120 FPS using the epic settings at 1440p DLSS quality mode. And I think that is just fantastic GPU performance that does not require any tweaking or optimized settings. It's fine. But the CPU is a different story. As the Ryzen 5 3600 I paired with the 3060 shown in this footage here was often limiting that GPU's performance a good deal below its full potential. It often kept the RTX 3060 at 70 or 80% GPU utilization. When pushed to its absolute max with all the units possible on screen sent to attack move at a base, I saw the Ryzen 5 3600 dip the CPU limited frame rate here below 60, and the frame times got much more spiky. At the worst, it was in the low 50s here while this was happening. The thing is, there's not much you can do about this as a player regarding this performance, as it all comes from the game code crunching away on the CPU, and it doesn't have much to do with graphical settings or render thread stuff. As soon as units stop attacking and they stop moving and the AI settles down, you can see the frame rate shoot up all of a sudden into the 90s as the CPU burden is completely coming from gameplay here. The CPU limited nature of this game has to do with the core gameplay, and it doesn't have to do with graphical settings, and that's something you cannot scale with optimized settings. This is something I've seen in the past for games that have a lot of simulation, and it definitely applies here. Still, I would not say it was a poor experience on the Ryzen 5 3600, given the nature of the game camera here. Frame rate variations and even frame time fluctuations are a lot less noticeable due to a general lack of continuous camera movement. Beyond performance, there are two other things I want to highlight here, and those are support for monitor features. If you're on an ultra-wide display, I have found that the gameplay is great on those ultra-wide monitors. The UI pushes to the edges, and there's a lot of real estate, and there's no oddness in the controls or the placement of contextual menus that will pop up. Most of the real-time rendering scales well here. Beyond gameplay though, support is less complete. For the map screen, everything there is actually contained to 16:9, but they reproject the map zoomed in to fill in the extra wide space on the screen edges. It looks okay, but it is less than ideal, of course. For talking head moments which are rendered in real time, they are rendered in ultra wide, but they put on a huge vignette on the left and right to presumably hide things which they did not account for during development, which would show up in the extra wide space on the edges. For FMV sequences during deployment, you get classic black bars on the left left and right. So ultra-wide support is there for gameplay, and the game works well in other scenarios with it, but a good deal of the art out of that gameplay experience has compromises when viewed in ultra-wide, and it does not meaningfully use the added real estate. This, though, is a better situation than the HDR in the game. HDR does technically work as the game loads up and the monitor detects it as running in HDR, but as soon as you are in game, it's easy to see how it's not right. This snowy terrain here, for example, is red for some reason in HDR. So yeah, it would be awesome if we got official HDR support that was not broken. And with that being said, I'm actually at the end of this video here. Tempest Rising is, bar some smaller stuff, an extremely polished and performant game that plays really well. Its fully fledged single player campaign is a treat, and I highly recommend this game to anyone out there who likes RTS. In an era where publishers and studios such as EA and Blizzard have categorically ignored making new entries into classic franchises, it is incredible to have a game of this high quality coming out doing the things it does. But anyway, if you did like this video, hit that like button, subscribe, ring the bell, support on Patreon, and as always, this is Alex, bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.